Hello. We'll still have a few people trickling in here, which is why I'm on stage to fill some of this time, but also to introduce this incredible session and incredible moderator that we have for you today. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce this final panel of the inaugural Narrative Change Summit. My name is Alec Turnbull, by the way. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Climate Film Festival. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this experiment. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just knew that we wanted to do something on Monday of Climate Week because a lot of people couldn't make it for the weekend. And it has evolved into this, and I think it has just been so humbling and inspiring to see how many people are here having conversations around this topic of film, of climate, and of narrative change at large in media. This session is Films from the Frontlines. It is presented by the NAACP, the Stories That Lead to Climate Action, and we have an incredible set of speakers and a filmmaker here, and a really amazing initiative to introduce. So to begin with, I would love to share a little bit more about NAACP's Climate in Color if you're not familiar with it. This initiative elevates the stories of Black communities on the front lines of climate injustice. Climate in Color shows that climate justice is civil rights, a fight for equity, resilience, and the power of community voices to drive national change. By pairing art and policy with advocacy, the initiative supports stories that demand a toxic-free environment, energy democracy, sustainable communities, and zero emissions. This intersectional approach is reflected in the Center's broader framework, advancing a united front to ensure every community has clean air, clean water, and that none bear disproportionate costs from pollution to utility burdens driven by data centers. The NAACP advocates, agitates, and litigates for the civil rights due to Black America. Our legacy, their legacy, is built on the foundation of grassroots activism by the biggest civil rights pioneers of the 20th century and sustained by 21st century activists. The Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at the NAACP builds on that legacy by working to dismantle systems that create the environmental and climate injustices for the global majority. This session is also supported by Climate Power, a strategic communications organization focused on winning the politics of climate, protecting climate progress, and building the political will for future bold climate action. So thank you to both organizations. We have an incredible set of speakers as well, and the first of them is Aubrey over here. Aubrey is director of the Center for Environmental and Climate Justice at the NAACP, where she spearheads strategy and coalition building to dismantle environmental racism. A native of Lakeland, Florida, she previously led health equity litigation and advocacy at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley and served as staff attorney with the ACLU of Northern California and the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, working closely with rural, migrant, and underserved communities. She also has experience in the Obama White House's Office of Presidential Personnel and has taught environmental policy and management at UC Davis. Connor serves on the ABA Board of Governors, the Earth Justice Board of Trustees, and has been recognized as a leading advocate, unsurprisingly, under 40 by organizations like the National Bar Association and the ABA's Young Lawyers Division. So please give it up for Aubrey.
Thank you so much, Alec, and I am so proud that we were able to partner with Climate Film Festival in this way. I mean, how better can we talk about the need for narrative justice work within this space other than working with a film festival that is mission aligned in this way? And to start us off, I actually want to bring up one of our partners that we have worked very closely with at Climate Power, and that is Alex Norris, who is the managing creative director there and is a multi-channel media creator and producer. And her work currently focuses on climate action, social justice, and politics. She's the producer of Alive Inside, which won the 2014 Sundance Film Festival Audience Award for U.S. documentary, and it was sold to Netflix. And it was also released in theaters nationwide. Since Alive Inside, Alex produced 2 additional nonfiction feature films, State of Eugenics, which was acquired by and aired on PBS, and in Our Mother's Gardens, which was acquired by Ava DuVernay's distribution collective Array and is streaming on Netflix, so make sure you all watch that. Alex has produced numerous Telly and Webby Award-winning projects for Fortune 50 brands and episodic documentary work for MTV and Vice Media. So please help me in welcoming Alex Norris.
Thank you so much. I love the smell of a film festival. Good evening. It's really nice to be here. It's an honor to be here with NAACP, the Solutions Project, and NRDC Rewrite the Future. At Climate Power, where I work, we know that to win on climate, we have to change the narrative around the issue. It's not enough just to talk about policy. We have to show how climate change affects real people and real communities. So we're moving the conversation from a distant, abstract issue based in data and cold facts to an immediate and deeply personal issue, and that's why we partnered with NAACP on the Climate in Color film competition. It's a commitment to supporting storytellers from the frontlines and the communities most impacted by climate change. This isn't about giving a platform to experts who speak for communities. It's about giving a microphone to the frontline and fence line leaders who are already living through and solving this crisis. These filmmakers are our creative innovators. By centering their authentic experiences, we can expose the systemic inequities behind environmental injustice. A film about a toxic-free environment or energy democracy isn't just art, it's a powerful tool for advocacy that can drive measurable change and hold polluters accountable. Tonight, as we reflect on Hurricane Katrina, 20 years later, we are reminded that disasters are not just natural events. They are man-made decisions that expose deep-rooted injustices. The films you're going to see this evening, including the incredible work by our filmmaker Leon Lorenzo, are a direct response to that. They show us where we've been and, more importantly, where we're going. This work is about combating eco-fatigue and misinformation with something far more powerful: hope, resilience, and lived experience. Our goal is to shift culture because culture is what ultimately drives policy. And with that, I think we're ready for our first panel, which will consist of leaders from the NAACP, the Solutions Project, and a wonderful director named Tracy Curry, who just finished a 3-part series on Hurricane Katrina, which you should all watch on Nat Geo. And thank you. Enjoy.
All right. Well, we made it on the stage, so that is.
We made it, okay?
We made it. So first of all, I want to thank Alex again for that amazing introduction to this panel. And as you all may see, President Johnson, he is still on his way here, and because of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, relating to the climate crisis, relating to weather-related issues, he is still in transit, and that's why we have to fix these issues, right? That's why we have to fix it. But I am so excited to be here with Gloria and Tracy today and to talk a little bit about this intersection. So first I want to just introduce them. So I'm going to start with Tracy A. Curry, who is an Academy Award nominated filmmaker, producer, showrunner, and writer of powerful stories. And many of you all may know her from Nat Geo's Hurricane Katrina Race Against Time. That is, yes, we could give a hand for that. which is such a powerful piece of work. And we're just so deeply grateful for the work that you've done in that, as well as being a Climate in Color ambassador. So thank you for that. She spent more than 2 decades creating compelling, in-depth narratives for multimedia platforms, both in long and short form. Curry has also co-directed and served as producer for Attica, a Showtime documentary which received an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature in 2022 and premiered opening night at the 2021 Toronto International Film Festival. She also was nominated for an NAACP Image Award because she's so amazing. And that was for Outstanding Documentary as well. And in 2023, Tracy A. Curry served as a showrunner for Onyx Collective's Emmy-nominated 8-part documentary series, Searching for Soul Food. She has so much experience, and we'll be able to hear a lot about that today during the panel, including being a producer for several national cable news shows, and her work has been featured among a number of networks, including PBS, ESPN, MSNBC, BET, HGTV, TV1, CNN, and ABC. And I also just learned earlier today that she is probably one of the best people to call if you're having to do a bunch of things at once, because she had to do 70 interviews basically at the same time for the Hurricane Katrina docuseries, and that deserves a round of applause in and of itself.
Yes. Go on, girl.
And next, I get the pleasure of introducing Gloria Walton, who is the co-founder and the president of the Solutions Project. And she is really a dynamic individual, and so I'm so excited that she's going to be a part of this conversation as well. After 16 years in community organizing at Scope in South Central LA, Gloria entered into philanthropy with the purpose of disrupting the status quo and growing the impact and influence of climate justice movement that we are now living in. Under her leadership, the Solutions Project has deepened its relationships across the American South, and when climate disasters struck, first with the ice storm in Mississippi, in Texas, followed by Hurricane Ida in Louisiana, Gloria and her team mobilized swiftly. They provided over $2.25 million in rapid response grants and distributed 450 solar generators to grantee partners throughout the region. Yes. Additionally, they have collaborated with partners to amplify their climate solutions, reaching national outlets like USA Today and stories from communities who were actually impacted by these disasters. Over the last few years, Gloria Walton has more than quadrupled the Solutions Project impact and influence by leading a growing team and now funding and amplifying the innovations of more than 350 grassroots grantees across 45 states. And this is probably the most important for this conversation now. Notably, 90% of those grants are going towards people of color led and 80% to women or non-binary led organizations.
Right.
So we have the dream team for this conversation when we're talking about films from the front line. And I would just also like to take a moment for the fact that there are 3 Black women on the stage talking about climate justice, narrative justice work, which I think is really important in this moment because I think this is what it means to really amplify the stories from the communities where people are actually coming from. And so, Tracy, I want to start with your film, the docuseries, Hurricane Katrina: Race Against Time. It revisits one of the most devastating climate disasters in U.S. history. And now we're 20 years post-Katrina, but we're also at a time with this administration where we know that we have an administration that's trying to set us 20 years back. So what are the lessons that you feel like we have learned, and what are the things that, where are the places we still need to grow based on your storytelling and what you learned in doing the docuseries Hurricane Katrina Race Against Time?
Well, if you'd asked me this question a year ago, my answer would be very different than what it is today. Just sort of speaking from this perspective of what I kind of learned through making the series, obviously there was an election happening. We were making the series and we did not know what the outcome of it would be. But one of the people who's in the series is a guy named Marty Bamonde, and Marty was the only FEMA official who was on the ground in New Orleans when Katrina made landfall. And Marty, well, as of January 2025, is still working with FEMA to this day. I don't know what has become of him. I hope he's still there because he's a great guy. But one of the things that Marty talks about is the lessons that FEMA learned from Katrina and applied. And the word at the heart of that lesson and what FEMA's approach to disaster preparedness and response became is a dirty word today, but it's equity. One of the things that they understood from Katrina is that the people who are most vulnerable on the front end of the disaster are the people who are going to have the most difficult time recovering afterwards. And in the case of Katrina, this was something that affected 80% of the city. Almost the entire city was underwater. The flood did not discriminate by race, class, any of that. Where the discriminatory effect was on the other side of the storm. It was the people who, because of structural reasons, could not get out of the city. It was the people who were unable to recover and respond. And if you go to New Orleans now, you can see where those lines are. If you go to the lower Ninth Ward, which is a working class community of homeowners, most of these people who scrimped and saved and did whatever you need to do during Jim Crow in order to own a home, you walk through that neighborhood and it's block after block after block of a set of steps and then a grassy plot where there used to be a house today, right now. And so one of the things that FEMA learned was that if you prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable people, it helps everybody, right? And so the woman who was the person in charge of FEMA, again, before January 2025, understood that and they'd kind of apply that. And the other thing that they learned was that the government can't take a top-down approach. There's so much knowledge, and I can speak specifically about New Orleans in the community about what people need and about that place. And one of the things that the lessons that the government learned was that you have to partner with people. You can't come in and tell people what they need. You have to go to people and ask them, and then they will tell you. And then there's a partnership, and there's already a lot of organizations on the ground in New Orleans doing the kind of work that you're funding that are doing this work. And so the knowledge is with the people. And so when you ask me the question, what are the things that we've learned, I think there were some great lessons that we've learned, but unfortunately, there's this cloud that hangs over this whole conversation right now. But unfortunately, so much of that has just been wiped away. But we were just over there sort of talking about one of my favorite things that Marion Kaba says, which is hope is a discipline. So I'm going to try to practice it here. My hope still lies with the people, because even now, with everything that's happening up here, there's still people on the ground in New Orleans right now that are doing work to try to help people live with the water, that are trying to help people be resilient and all of these things. So, yeah.
I love that. And I mean, I think that and the people power, I think that is such a critical theme of the work that you did, Tracy, in really highlighting those stories from people who were there, and Gloria, to the work that you all do. I mean, you all are shifting money, you're shifting resources, you're offering amplification with communication and other efforts. I mean, that seems to be an important part of this climate justice storytelling. So how do you see this storytelling being a part of climate justice work that is needed at the front lines, actually in the community?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that, and if you don't mind dovetailing on what you all were just talking about, I'm loving hope as a discipline, because I often say that love is a discipline. And that discipline is what's exercised in communities on the ground. And just to add to this conversation about lessons learned, as you say, right, the government right now has reeled us back 20, 40 years and trying to reel us back even more. And the reality is that our communities don't have the luxury of not getting the lessons. And so 20 years ago, right, we're commemorating the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Our communities got the lesson. And it was clear that government ain't gonna save us, right? And right now we've lost FEMA, NOAA, and these are institutions that were first responders, so to speak, or institutions that helped us understand the impact of potential weather that was coming our way. And now neither of those exist. Our communities knew back then that we couldn't really rely on those, but we needed them. We were happy that we had them, you know, to join forces with us. But we knew we still had to be first responders because we're often the first and worst hit. And now fast forward to today, 20 years later, we got the lesson. Because what you now see, because we're connected to 350 organizations across the country, is that grassroots organizations that are led by Black folks, Indigenous folks, Latine folks, Asian and Pacific Islander, trans folks, like everybody is knowing that being a first responder means that we need to build resilience hubs across this country. And they're doing that at the local level. And that means that neighbors are talking to neighbors. They're codifying the assets that they have. They know who on the block has the backup generator, who on the block is connected to the community organization who can help distribute food and water when we need it. So it's that kind of connection that's happening. And so that's one additional lesson I want to offer into that conversation, is that communities got the lesson and we're building those resilience hubs to be resilient and first responders and showing up when no one else does, which is what you beautifully displayed in Katrina, right? Like that is what was happening then. It was neighbors saving neighbors. When I think about storytelling, you know, the power of storytelling is being rooted in our humanity. It makes you feel a connection, you know, the empathy where you're like, okay, this could actually be me. It makes you, it humanizes an experience. It helps you understand what's possible, and it helps you feel the values behind the experience. And I say this because a lot of dominant media perpetuates a lot of the dominant worldviews around individualism, capitalism, hyperconsumption, mass waste, mass production, all of these things that are part of the reason that we're here today. And when you root in communities, they're amplifying alternative worldviews about possibility and how we can move differently in this world, and how I can feel connected to my neighbors and people that I'm sitting with and everyone in this room and people who aren't able to be in this room. They're showing us what it means to be interdependent. How do we exercise a sense of love, the discipline of love? How are we sharing, right? It's like simple things where it's not about the competition, but it's like, how can I show up for you? Because showing up for you is showing up for me and my family too. So that's the values piece. And then the other thing that I feel like storytelling does is activates you to take action. You know, you think about the stories that compelled you to act, whether that was the horrific story of George Floyd, right? That really transmuted a powerful movement, you know, like we transmuted such a toxic and heavy gravitas of an energy into the power and love of community, you know, whether that's like the Black Lives Matter movement and Movement for Black Lives and many other movements that are out there. You think about the Me Too movement that may have activated you to take action. Or, you know, when indigenous communities came together with other communities in a solidarity stance for Standing Rock. You know, it's these kinds of stories that give us an impulse to act because we're feeling the love that we have when we come together. Like, that's a powerful energy. People think hate is powerful, but love is the transmutational energy of our time. And the power of love will take any energy and make it pure. And we, like, the only way that love can germinate is when we come together and do what we need to do together, and that's looking out for each other. And I'll pause there.
I love that so much. And leading with love and leading with storytelling as an ability to move us to action. I mean, at the NAACP, we have the Hollywood Bureau, and part of the reason why we've invested so much into storytelling, having a Hollywood Bureau, having Climate in Color, is because we recognize that even though we're a policy organization, that we cannot move our policy agenda without this narrative justice work, without making sure that our 2,200 units that we have across the country, that they feel activated, that they see their story being amplified in the media and in different spaces. Because to your point, I mean, we're at a place now where a lot of media, they are very comfortable spreading misinformation and disinformation, and it's going to be on us to ensure that we're telling those stories that actually are authentic to the community. And Tracy, I mean, to Gloria's point, I mean, you did this really well in Hurricane Katrina Race Against Time. And what do you feel like is the obligation or the responsibility of a filmmaker, someone in that role, to ensuring that they're amplifying stories that are actually happening in the community?
Stories related to climate justice.
Relating to climate justice, yeah.
There's a phrase that my mom always says. It's just like, you got to put it down where the goats can get it. I think there's a way, like when I was sort of pitching my approach to the series, and we'd gone to New Orleans, we'd spoken to people there, and that's really where we learned that Katrina is a climate justice story in a way that I don't think that we quite understood at the time or in the last 20 years. It was the people there that told us, like, look, there's this land that we've, the thing about New Orleans is that people had a very low rate of transient. So if you were from New Orleans, you tended to stay, or if you left, you tended to come back. And so people have a very close relationship with the place, with the actual land and geography of it. And what they were telling us was, there's this land that, we have watched disappear over generations here. And that land is what had always blunted the full force of the storms that came to New Orleans. That land was our natural protective barrier, and now it's gone. And of course, we have a scientist in the film and all of the science that supports this, but where we first learned it was from the people who carry this knowledge, right? And I think that there's a way that when you talk about climate and environment, like, people's eyes glaze over. When I kind of pitched, like, oh, we're gonna do this sort of environmental justice angle, in the first episode, people kind of looked at me like, okay, girl, they're gonna turn the TV off.
That just breaks my heart.
But I think as a storyteller, it's your responsibility to understand that, right? Like, you gotta give people the information in a way that they're able to receive it. And when you start talking about climate, it's like the air we breathe, the land, the sun, the water, right? Like, these things that we just sort of take for granted because they, sustain our lives and we don't really have to do much. And it just feels so diffuse and big and difficult to put your arms around. But people know the glass of water I drank this morning when I woke up, and this piece of land that my home is on, and this air that's in my community that my kids are breathing in my house, right? And so I think if you, kind of what you were getting at, if you get to that human sort of element of it and start there, because we can all sort of relate to that, and then kind of build on it. And so, like, our approach was, we tell the story of the disappearing of the coastal lands and all of that and how it made the city vulnerable to the storms, but we tell it from the perspective of a man from the lower Ninth Ward. And what he says is that when I was a boy, I would go and play in the bayou, and I would catch frogs and turtles and and it was like this natural wonderland. And then he goes back as a grown man, an old man, years later, and it's gone. The land's not there anymore. And so now you're like, oh, right? Like, this is a person that I can touch. I can get into this bigger environmental story through this man's experience and the loss of this place. And then on the back end, the final episode of the story, that land is now back. And it's back because after Katrina, a bunch of people from the lower Ninth Ward who had lost everything got together on somebody's porch and were like, we can't wait on the government to save us. And so they pulled together their resources and then brought the government in, like, we're going to show you. And they restored that place. And so now you have this sort of devastating blight of the lower Ninth Ward next to this gorgeous ecological wonderland. I mean, there's like the alligators came back and like it, I mean, it's incredible. And this is something that the people in the community did, right? But we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't gone to the people and began with them to start telling this bigger environmental story. So I think that's the responsibility of a storyteller. Like, you got to know how to give the information to the people in a way that they're able to receive it and understand it and for it to be meaningful to them.
And
And let me just say, you told that story because I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, and my people are from basically Mississippi and Louisiana. So I thought that I was actually quite versed in what happened with Hurricane Katrina, but you illuminated, even for me, a lot of nuances that I was like, oh, I didn't know that, right? And some of it was so horrific, you know, even just imagining like the lower Ninth Ward, that's the closest to the levees. And, you know, when you're hearing this stuff on the media, you don't really put yourself in those shoes. So to just, you know, when I learned the detail of the levees breaking at like 4:35 in the morning, something like that, you're asleep. You are asleep, like sleeping good. That's that REM sleep time. You know what I mean? And so for the levees to break, and they say within seconds, the homes in the lower Ninth Ward were underwater, like you illuminated that. I'm like, oh my God. So talking about the empathy, that brought me to tears. And I heard direct stories, but it was knowing that I was like, oh my God, like just imagining being asleep and in seconds I'm underwater. And if I can't swim, and if I'm elderly, and if I'm a baby, and if I have a disability, oh my God. Yeah. And so thousands of lives lost. And we don't talk about that enough, but the story doesn't stop there. So that's the power of storytelling. So I appreciate what you just shared about how, again, community takes something that's so heavy and transmutes it into powerful, like a powerful story and a powerful narrative. And I think that's part of what is important to me about storytelling, is that yes, you need to tell the facts and talk about the doom and gloom, but it's the power that gives us hope. And knowing what people did, you know, it's not just stopping at the victimization, which is often what mainstream media does. But when we tell our own stories, we become victors and visionaries, and we take our power and our narratives back. And then we can make sure that people know that, yeah, it didn't stop at the victimization because we built a beautiful garden. We replenished our own communities. So I just appreciate you naming that, and just wanted to just share, like I'm just feeling what you're saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, thank you. I think one of the most devastating things that I learned was from General Honore, who kind of came in and started getting things going in the right direction. And one of the things that he says in the series is that when they went in after everything to begin finding people who were deceased, first of all, most of the loss of life had happened in the lower Ninth Ward. And what they found is it was elderly people who were like on their sofa, right? Because this wall of water came in, but just sort of connecting to what I was saying before about like realizing this is a environmental justice story, that land had been disappearing because of the oil and gas industry and because of dredging. And as one of our, we sort of use him as the voice of moral authority, this guy, Malik Rahim, who's an activist and was a Black Panther. He's just amazing. But one of the things that he says is because we were so drunk on prosperity, we've destroyed that natural barrier that always protected us. And of course, who are the people who are the most harmed by this? And they knew this. There was a whole simulation that they did the year before Katrina that played out exactly as Katrina did. And what they understood is that the people, because of this climate disaster, who would be most vulnerable were the elderly, the disabled, and the poor. And they knew this a year in advance, that there would be 100,000 plus people in the city that could not get out because of these sort of structural reasons and this failure to account for, again, the most vulnerable people on the front end of the storm. And like, imagine a world if we had prioritized the needs of those people, right? If we had understood these are the most precious people because they're the most vulnerable, then the whole city could have been protected. Yeah. So I think that also is just a blueprint for the vision of a future that, like, hopefully we still can create for ourselves if we ask, you know, the least among us, what do they need? Even in a completely self-serving way, it helps us all.
Yeah. No, I very much appreciate all of both of your comments. And it also, you know, makes me think about when we try to have these conversations around why NOAA is so important and why climate observations and tracking weather patterns and all of that, why that's so important. I mean, your docuseries highlighted why that's so important. It also, it highlighted the importance of having enough FEMA staff, right? And having enough FEMA resources. I mean, we just, we learned that 180 FEMA employees are basically like, we're done. What are we supposed to do with the limited resources that we have? We have an EPA that's trying to roll back all the, policies and practices that we have around regulating greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, and I think that this type of storytelling helps people to understand the urgency of the moment, but then also, to your point, Gloria, as well, it helps people to understand, what Tracy amplified, which is that we don't have to feel defeated, even in a moment like what we're in now. And I have a question around, how do we balance, the fact that a lot of this it can feel traumatic. It can feel really hard. It can feel really like deep and sad and frustrating. But I guess this is maybe for both of you. How do you balance, that connection of amplifying that we are in a crisis and there is a sense of urgency, but then also doing it in a way that leaves people feeling hopeful. And I know, Tracy, you kind of touched on this some, but I would love for you to talk a little bit more about this, and Gloria, for you to talk about like the stories that you all pick across the country in order to strategically ensure that that is a part of the larger climate justice narrative.
I mean, look, it really does go back to picking, any family, a person who's from a most impacted community, sharing their narrative, because it never stops at victimization. And I'm thinking particularly of two groups right now. Native Renewables is one, and they work in indigenous territory and Navajo Nation. And they honed in on a story with Mr. Graham, and he's a tribal member. And in Navajo Nation, there's about, thousands of families. I think, at one point it was like 15,000, but I think they've been like working on it, that didn't have electricity. So Mr. Graham's story was talking about off-grid solar and really trying to amplify a solution to make it accessible, relatable to his community, but even to others outside of his community, like other communities that look like his community or have the same experience of his community. And making sure that we're telling the whole story, where it's not just about Mr. Graham getting solar on his home and all the benefits and him saving money and all that. It's also about the jobs that were created and who installed that solar and who was trained to install that solar. And it was people from his community that looked like him, and what that does for the local economy and all of those things. So it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. And that story ended up getting picked up. We actually helped it get picked up in the New York Times. And as a result of amplifying it, it touched thousands of communities across the country and some across the world, but also helped them raise $100,000 to support their work at their organization pretty quickly. So that's some of the power of storytelling. And then I think about Valencia. I call her V. She's a dear sister and friend of mine who runs the Smile Trust, and she's a founder of the Smile Trust in Miami. And we know that Miami, everyone's saying, will soon be underwater. The science says pretty soon, right? And so it's another community where Valencia's work. She works with Black communities, immigrant communities, and the unhoused communities. And they're often doing the first responder work, because Miami's a impacted place with weatherization. Like, bad weather happens too often. And so Valencia's organization, Smile Trust, is often feeding folks, bringing food, bringing supplies like toiletries and all the things that you need when disasters hit. They also opened up a clinic to make sure that people have access to health care during these times. And it's important, I want to talk about Valencia's work because she deals with the unhoused folks where, many of us heard how folks are on certain platforms saying that we should murder our unhoused people, right? And this is ridiculous, right? Where's the humanity? And that's part, again, we keep talking about humanity, but that's what stories remind us, is that none of us are that far removed from being unhoused. But sometimes people get in this high place where they think that they are. And Valencia's work, since NOAA's not here, since FEMA's not here, they're the ones who's doing all the work. And her work was actually featured recently on PBS. So her story will be coming out, and we'll share that with you so you can share it with folks. But it's the reason that we want to amplify that work is because it's just people just like us looking out for each other. And sometimes we think that with the climate crisis, it's so huge, it's so big, it's too much, it's unwieldy. But the reality is that when we work together, our creativity, our passion, our compassion, our ingenuity, all of that is so much greater. And that's what stories remind us, is that we actually do have the power to change this thing as long as we do it together.
Gosh. It's a dark time, guys. I don't know. But, there's this thing that I always go to when I think about the importance of stories in moments like this. And it's something that Zora Neale Hurston said, which is that if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you liked it. And so I think the thing that lives in that vacuum of silence that fills it with noise is stories, right? And I mean, for me, I always look at the things that they, you know who I mean by they, that they are trying to take away from us, right? Because those are the things that are always the tools that we use to get free. And they know what those things are. So it's why books are being taken out of schools. It's why curriculums are being taken out of or changed, and books are being taken out of libraries, curriculums are being changed in schools. The story of who we are as a country, as a people, is being rewritten. Things are being taken out of museums because they know the power of stories, right? And one thing about the people who are peddlers of disinformation is they are wrong and strong. They're loud about it. And so it could feel like there's a lot of them, but there's more of us. And so I think if you have a story to tell, if it's about you, your life, your family, your experience, be loud about it, be insistent, let it burn you up until that fire comes out, and letting the world know what that story is. Don't be afraid. Don't be, I mean, it's scary, but like, be afraid and then do it anyway. Tell the story anyway. Like, you have your truth. Let that be the light and the fire for you, you know? And so I think I just kind of always go back to that. Like, I know stories are powerful because that's why y'all are trying to take them away. So I'm going to be even more insistent about telling them, and I think everybody else should also.
I love that. So what I'm gathering is we need to take up space, and we also need to understand that we are our best first defense. And so I have a question for you both, which is it's broad, but I think for, all of us here, I mean, we're thinking about how do we shift the narrative? How do we shift the political landscape? And what's one shift, cultural, political, or economic, that you believe that we need most urgently to reframe our future as it relates to climate issues? And I can start.
Yeah.
I'll start. I think that, from the NAACP perspective, the way that we look at these issues is intersectionally. We look at climate, we look at environmental justice as civil rights issues. And I think that there has to be an understanding that, back in the 70s, when the environmental movement started, it didn't necessarily include a bunch of people who looked like us, but the laws that were created at that time were supposed to be for all communities. The policies that were created in the 60s and into the 70s and 80s, that were created were supposed to be an understanding that we needed more of an equity focus to our policies in this country. And somewhere along the line, we lost that. We lost the understanding that there is supposed to be an intersectional approach to what climate and environmental justice issues look like. It's not supposed to be just merely conservation or just merely environmental. And so when we're having Climate Week, we should have folks from the labor movement here. We should have folks who are education experts. We should have folks in the housing space. Like, we should have folks in all of these areas because climate touches us all. And so culturally, we need to start thinking about these issues from that intersectional approach, because I think that that is really how we're going to get to the points that you all mentioned.
Ashe.
About all of us seeing this as an interconnected issue that touches each of our communities.
I think you said it.
I mean, for real though, like, yeah, you know, and so I won't repeat any of that because I'm right there with you and 100% agree. What I will talk about is being in New Orleans a couple weeks ago commemorating Hurricane Katrina. And, you know, again, that's where my people are from. So being able to plant my feet on the soil and be at the Mississippi River and praying before sunrise meant everything to me. And I did that with community. And people came together and we danced, we sang, you know, we shared our stories. We did ceremony. We did ritual, and there was lots of prayer, in addition to the crying and the grieving and all the things, because we were commemorating the lives lost and, you know, the families that are still displaced and the people who are still in recovery. And what was so powerful for me that we don't talk a lot about in our movements, and I honestly don't talk about it too much either, but it's on my heart to talk about now because this is the lineage that we come from. This is, you know, ancestral wisdom that's really in our core. And the reality is that we all are living altars, meaning that source energy is within all of us. And when I was there, like, we were tapped and connected into source energy. And it was the power of prayer and people coming together. And you know, prayer doesn't have to be a religious thing. And for me, it's not. It really is about spirit, and it's about heart, and it's about love. And that was the energy that blanketed all of us. It was cozy, right? It was a cold day, and it was cozy, and it held us. And I feel like that, like, if I have to name something, like, even for myself, I've been out of practice. And so I'm like, ooh, I need to bring my rituals back. I need to bring my ceremony back, because it's that coupled with our action and our passion and our conviction and our kind of, what should I say, je ne sais quoi, like a quantum intelligence, right? But it's like what we know mentally, but it's also what our body knows and what our bodies remember. And it's what the heart has a vision for. And so, you know, there's a symbiotic relationship between those things. And when you're in ceremony, ritual, and prayer, you get reconnected to that and you get grounded in a new way that kind of energizes us and sustains us for what's to come and helps us be able to endure. And just knowing that, you know, what I was reminded there is that when I'm in prayer, it's not going to just be me. Every single person there is in prayer and ceremony. And that's part of the power, the secret, the silent power, the spiritual power, that energy of love that we need more of, that I think will compel us to activate others to act.
So we are, you know, 20 years post-Katrina. And I know we've, you know, had some highs and some lows in the conversation of what that means, but I would love to hear what gives each of you hope. You know, 20 years post-Katrina, I mean, Gloria, you were in the Mississippi side, like, you saw that from that. Tracy, you had the experience of, you know, talking to people who lived that for during Katrina, but then the post and the trauma and then also the hope. So what gives each of you hope 20 years post-Katrina?
I don't know. I think this is going to sound a little redundant, but for me, it's the people. The people that we spent time with who were gracious enough to relive this horrible trauma for the sake of telling the story, and so that the truth might be known. I love those people so much. They're like my family now, but they give me hope. I think there's a word, resilience, that gets applied often to the people of New Orleans, and they're tired of that word. This is what they've told us, and I think it has something to do with the suggestion that if you are resilient, you are expected to suffer all hurts, endure all things, right? Be superhuman when you're just a human being. Human beings don't endure all things all the time. Sometimes humans break and they don't come back from that. But that being said, there is just something about the people of that place. And the way that they sort of carry the culture within them wherever they've gone, the way that they again, are so connected to the city, understand their own needs, showing up for each other before, during, and after Katrina. And again, so much of the knowledge of what needs to happen lives with them and lives with the people. I mean, every single person that's in the series is doing something right now to better their space and their environment. There's one woman who's a PhD, actually. She was working in a call center, Dr. Angela Chalk, when Katrina happened, and was getting all the calls of there's a point in the series where she's you hear someone asking for help, and then all you hear is a swirl, and she listened to that over and over again. Now she's got this organization where she's teaching people what you can do on your own front yard, right? Because there's a certain amount of water that's always going to come into the city of New Orleans. They just live with it. It just is what it is, right? The city is sinking all the time, so it's a thing. And she's showing people how to do, I don't know what the technical words are for it, but when the water comes in, here's how you can divert it to go this way, or here's how you can capture it to do this, and whatever. And these are everyday grandmas and grandpas and aunties that are learning on their own little plot of land what they can do, what kind of environmental remediation things that they can do. And this is just people being in community with each other. So if I have any hope, whether it's that city in particular or any of our communities, it's us. Right? It's us realizing that we are the answer. And I know AI is real cute and whatever these days, but you can't get so disconnected from people, because we are the answer. We are how we survive this. It's being connected to one another, being in community, seeing each other, showing up for each other. That's where all of my hope lies now and always. Yeah.
Ashe. Yeah, I mean, I'm just echoing more of the same, right? Our people know, period. We are the experts. We have the vision. We can articulate the problems like no other, and we can articulate the possibilities like no other. We've been organizing for generations, since before I was born, and many of us in this room, and we're all a part of that legacy, and that's what we try to make sure that we continue to resource, is that legacy of organizing and power building and the visionaries and expertise that's on the ground. So everything that you said, ditto, 100% support that, and that's where my hope is. And I feel like every single sector needs to realize that and wake up, because how boring is whatever we do if it's not for humanity and if it's not for the people? And I feel like that's what each of us are tasked with, is figuring out, okay, how am I making communities better? How am I joining forces with communities? If it's not literal, what are the indirect ways that I'm supporting and helping community? Because that is the power, that's the heart, that's the love, that's our present day, and that's our future.
And with that, I mean, I don't think that we can end on a better note. And so I just want to have us give a round of applause again for our panelists. This has been such an enriching conversation for me. My heart feels full to be on the stage with both of you, individuals who are just really just rock stars in your own right. And I'm just so grateful and appreciative of the work that you're doing on behalf of our communities and to amplify these stories in a way that feels authentic to the people who are experiencing environmental and climate injustices the most. So thank you. And so, for the first time,